That evening, I sat at the dining table with my spoon trembling in my hand. Not from weakness, but from age, the kind that comes after 73 winters have passed through your bones. The laughter of my children and grandchildren filled the room, a sound that usually warmed me like summer rain. But tonight, something sharp hid inside my 8-year-old grandson Tommy's giggle. I'd just asked my daughter if I'd taken my evening pills, the blue ones that keep my heart steady. "Did I take them after lunch or dinner?" I muttered, trying to remember. That's when Tommy looked straight at me, his brown eyes bright with cruel delight, and sneered, "Grandpa can't count." The words hung in the air like smoke from a blown-out candle. My hand froze mid-air, soup dripping back into the bowl. The room went quiet for a heartbeat. Then nervous laughter rippled from the adults. But I didn't laugh. I couldn't. Because in that moment, watching his small face twisted with mockery, I knew something had to change. This boy needed to learn what numbers really meant, not on paper, but in life. And I would be his teacher.
Just before you continue to watch, Joe would like you to subscribe to this channel and like this video. It would encourage him to keep his streak of thrilling revenge stories for you to watch. All right, it's back to the story. His small shoulders shook with delight, as though he'd discovered the world's funniest secret. Tommy's parents, my son James and his wife Carol, chuckled nervously, the kind of laugh people make when they don't know if something's appropriate but don't want to seem uptight. "Kids say the darndest things," Carol murmured, ruffling Tommy's hair. But I saw James shift uncomfortably in his chair. He knew better. He'd been raised to respect his elders, to understand that age brings wisdom, not weakness. Yet here he sat, letting his son mock the man who'd worked double shifts at the factory for 30 years to put him through college. The sting wasn't in the words themselves. I've forgotten plenty of things lately. Last week, I couldn't remember if I'd locked the garage. Yesterday, I counted the stairs twice going up to bed. These things happen when your mind has held 7 decades of memories. But the disrespect, that cut deep. It wasn't the forgetting that hurt. It was how Tommy weaponized it against me, turning my age into ammunition for his entertainment. This boy would carry that arrogance into manhood unless someone stopped it. And in that moment, I decided that someone would be me. I didn't scold him. I didn't raise my voice or slam my fist on the table like my father would have done. Instead, I smiled, not the warm smile I usually gave my grandchildren, but something else entirely. It was the smile of a man who just made a decision. Tommy's laughter stuttered when he saw it, confusion flickering across his face. He'd expected anger, maybe tears, perhaps the shaking finger of an old man's rage. But my silence, my calm, that wasn't in his playbook. "Grandpa?" he said, suddenly uncertain. I just kept smiling, spooning my soup with deliberate slowness, each movement measured and controlled. The trembling in my hand had stopped completely. James cleared his throat. "Dad, are you okay?" I nodded, still looking at Tommy. "Never better," I said quietly. The boy shifted in his seat, no longer the confident little comedian from moments before. Good. Let him wonder. Let him feel that first prickle of unease, because his real education hadn't even started yet. Around us, dinner continued, forks scraping plates, water glasses clinking. But between Tommy and me, something had shifted. He thought the night was over, that his little joke would fade into family memory, but it was only beginning. When the main course arrived, Carol's pot roast with potatoes and green beans, I pushed my full plate toward Tommy. "You're young and strong," I said gently, my voice carrying the weight of something more than dinner conversation. Count how many bites you can eat tonight. Tomorrow, I'll ask you again. His eyes lit up like Christmas morning. 8-year-old boys love challenges, especially ones that involve food. His little chest puffed with pride as he grabbed my plate eagerly, adding my portion to his own. I can eat more than anyone, he boasted, already shoveling food into his mouth. I bet I can count to 100 bites. The adult smiled, thinking I was being a sweet grandfather, sharing my meal with a growing boy. But I wasn't being sweet. I was setting a trap, and Tommy was walking right into it with his mouth open. As he ate, counting aloud between chews, 23, 24, I quietly observed. This child who mocked my counting was now obsessed with his own numbers. Later, while he celebrated reaching 67 bites before his stomach gave up, I excused myself to find Carol in the kitchen. I pulled Carol aside while she loaded the dishwasher, the clatter of plates masking our conversation from the others. Tomorrow, I said, keeping my voice low but firm, do not serve Tommy breakfast, or lunch, or dinner. She nearly dropped the glass she was holding. What? Dad, that's necessary, I interrupted. Let me handle his meals tomorrow. Her face went through several expressions, confusion, concern, then something close to fear. I can't starve my child, that's abuse. It's not starving, it's teaching. One day without meals won't harm him, but one lifetime without respect will destroy him. I could see her struggling, torn between maternal instinct and the respect she had always shown me. James won't agree to this, she tried. James laughed tonight when his son mocked me. He's forgotten what I taught him about respect. Now I need to teach his son. I put my weathered hand on her shoulder. Trust me, Carol. I raised 3 children who became good adults. Let me do this. She looked toward the dining room where Tommy's laughter echoed. Finally, she nodded slowly. One day, she said, but if he gets sick, he won't. He'll get educated. And in the morning, my lesson would begin in earnest.
The next morning arrived with golden sunlight streaming through the kitchen windows. The smell of scrambled eggs, crispy bacon, and buttered toast filled every corner of the house. Tommy came bouncing down the stairs, his hair sticking up in wild directions, stomach already growling from last night's counting game. He slid into his usual chair, reaching for the plate Carol was preparing. That's when I raised my hand. No, I said calmly. Tommy counts his own meals today. Tommy laughed, that same confident giggle from last night. What? Come on, Grandpa, I'm hungry. Then count how many meals you've earned, I replied, spreading butter on my own toast with deliberate slowness. Yesterday, you showed everyone how good you are at counting. Today, you'll count something more important than bites. Carol set the plate down at the far end of the table, away from Tommy. Her hands shook slightly, but she held firm to our agreement. James looked up from his newspaper. What's going on? Your son is learning advanced mathematics, I said, the kind they don't teach in school. Tommy still thought it was a game, a harmless punishment for last night's joke. He shrugged dramatically. Fine, I don't need breakfast anyway. But I saw him swallow hard as we ate, without him. By lunchtime, Tommy's confidence had cracked like ice on a spring pond. He sat at the table, no longer bouncing or laughing, his eyes following every movement of our forks from plate to mouth. The smell of Carol's grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup hung thick in the air, and I watched his nostrils flare with each breath. I'm kind of hungry now, he said, trying to sound casual. Then count how many hours since you last ate, I suggested, dipping my sandwich in the soup. Let's see if you're as good with time as you are with making jokes. His eyes darted to his mother, seeking rescue. Carol looked away, busying herself with wiping an already clean counter. James had gone to the hardware store, conveniently avoiding the lesson altogether. "This isn't funny anymore," Tommy said, his voice smaller now. "Neither was last night," I replied simply. "But you laughed anyway." The boy's stomach growled audibly, a sound that filled the quiet kitchen like thunder. He pressed his hands against his belly, and for the first time since yesterday, he had nothing clever to say. The arithmetic of hunger had begun its work, subtracting arrogance with mathematical precision. Soon, he would whisper something entirely different. 2 o'clock came with Tommy's first real plea. He found me in the living room, where I sat reading the newspaper like any other Sunday. But nothing about this day was ordinary. He approached slowly, all his usual swagger gone, replaced by something I'd never seen in him before: humility. "Grandpa," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "can I eat now? Please?" His hands trembled slightly, though whether from hunger or emotion, I couldn't tell. Maybe both. I folded my newspaper deliberately, taking my time before meeting his eyes. "Count how many meals you can go without, since you're so good at laughing at people who forget numbers." His face crumpled like paper. "I didn't mean it like that." "How did you mean it? When you announced to everyone that Grandpa can't count? When you laughed at an old man's confusion? Tell me, what exactly did you mean?" He had no answer. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. For the first time in his 8 years, Tommy was learning that some mistakes couldn't be erased with a simple apology. They had to be paid for, and the currency was understanding. By 4 o'clock, James had returned from the store to find his son slumped at the kitchen table watching Carol prepare dinner. The smell of roasting chicken filled the house, and Tommy's face had taken on a grayish shade I'd never seen before. "What the hell is going on?" James demanded, finally unable to ignore what was happening. "Ask your son," I said from my chair. "He's learning to count." James looked at Tommy, then at me, his face reddening. "You're starving him because of last night, Dad? That's too far." "But you laughed too," I reminded him quietly. "When your son mocked me, you chuckled along. You taught him it was acceptable." The room went silent, except for the sizzling from the oven. James's mouth worked soundlessly as the truth of my words hit home. Carol stood frozen by the stove, spatula in hand. "He's just a kid," James tried weakly. "And kids become adults. Adults who either respect others or don't. Which kind do you want to raise?" Tommy looked between us, realizing for the first time that no one would rescue him from this lesson. His parents, who usually shielded him from every discomfort, were letting this happen. That's when he truly understood. Some educations come from books, others from empty stomachs. By evening, Tommy had become a ghost of his morning self. His hands trembled, not from age like mine, but from the hollow ache that had taken residence in his belly. His eyes had gone glassy, reflecting the kitchen light like pools of water. When we sat down for dinner, James, Carol, and me, Tommy sat with us but apart, his empty place setting a monument to his education. He tried one more brave smile, a shadow of yesterday's arrogance, but his lips quivered and betrayed him. "I learned my lesson," he said hopefully. "Can I eat now?" "What lesson?" I asked, cutting into my chicken with careful precision. "Tell me what you learned." He struggled for words, his 8-year-old vocabulary insufficient for the size of his realization. That I shouldn't laugh? At what? At, at you? Why not? Each question pushed him deeper into understanding. His stomach growled again, loud enough that we all heard it. Carol flinched. James stared at his plate. But I held firm, because this moment, this exact moment of breaking, was where real learning lived. The weight of his cruelty was finally equalizing with the weight of consequence. Soon, very soon, the breaking point would arrive. After dinner, while the others cleared dishes they could barely eat, I called Tommy to me. He approached like a wounded animal, cautious and afraid. The cockiness that had defined him for 8 years had evaporated completely, leaving behind something raw and real. "You thought numbers were a joke," I said, my voice firm but not cruel. "You thought forgetting pills or counting steps was funny. Now count your hunger. Count how many times your stomach has twisted today. Count the minutes you've thought about food. Count the tears you're holding back." His little body shook. The tears he'd been fighting finally spilled over, running down his cheeks in silent streams. I count 17 hours since I ate," he whispered. "Good," I said. "That's accurate. What else do you count?" "I count 3 times I wanted to cry, 7 times my stomach hurt, and 1 grandpa I hurt with my words." That last part broke something in my chest, but I didn't let it show. This wasn't about my feelings anymore. It was about his future, about the man he would become. "Keep counting," I said, "because numbers matter, and respect matters more." His stomach growled again, filling the silence between us like a prayer. This was the sound of education happening in real time, carved not in notebooks, but in the hollow of his belly. That night, after James and Carol had gone to bed, unable to watch anymore, Tommy came to me alone. The house was dark, except for the reading lamp beside my chair. He stood in the doorway in his pajamas, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, his face puffy from crying. His small hand reached out and tugged at mine, his voice cracking like thin ice. "Grandpa, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll never laugh at you again. I'll never laugh at anyone again. Please let me eat something. Anything." The words tumbled out between hiccuping sobs. His whole body shook with the force of his apology, and I could see this wasn't performance or manipulation. This was real. But I still held back, not from cruelty, but from necessity. "Why?" I asked simply. "Why won't you laugh at people anymore?" Because it hurts. When someone needs help, when they can't remember things, they don't need people laughing. They need... "What do they need, Tommy?" "Love. They need love and help, not jokes." Now we were getting somewhere. Apologies come easy when bellies are empty, but understanding, real understanding, that takes longer to digest. Finally, when his sobs had quieted to sniffles, I stood and walked to the kitchen. Tommy followed like a shadow, afraid I might change my mind. From the bread box, I pulled out a single slice of wheat bread. From the tap, I filled a glass with cool water. I placed both before him like an offering, simple, basic, but in that moment, more precious than any feast. Tommy grabbed the bread with both hands, but then stopped, looking up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Is it really okay?" "Eat slowly," I said. "Count each bite if you want, but this time count with gratitude, not pride." He took the smallest bite, chewing it 30 times before swallowing. Tears streamed down his face as he ate, mixing with the breadcrumbs at the corners of his mouth. Each bite seemed to carry more weight than food alone.
It carried understanding, humility, and the first seedlings of wisdom. The water he sipped between bites might as well have been honey for how carefully he drank it. "Thank you," he whispered after each swallow. "Thank you, Grandpa." This wasn't the thank you of polite manners. This was the thank you of someone who'd learned what it meant to need. When the bread was gone and the water glass empty, Tommy stayed seated, staring at the crumbs on his plate like they held secrets. I sat across from him, my own hands folded on the table, steady now, no trembling. "Remember this night," I told him, my voice cutting through the kitchen silence, sharp as winter wind. "Remember how hunger counted faster than laughter. Remember how one day without food felt longer than a year with plenty. And most importantly, remember this. When you grow up and have children of your own, and one of them mocks you for forgetting something, for being human, for aging, don't strike them, don't scream. Teach them. Teach them exactly what I taught you tonight." His eyes lifted to mine, still red and swollen, but filled with something new, understanding deeper than his 8 years should have allowed. Will I really remember this when I'm old like you?" "Every detail," I promised, because lessons learned through the stomach reach deeper than lessons learned through the ears. Pain is a teacher that never forgets to leave homework. He nodded slowly, processing this truth that was too big for his young mind, but would grow with him. When Tommy finally finished his bread and water, he didn't run back to his room or to his video games like usual. Instead, he scooted his chair around the table and leaned against me, his head finding that soft spot between my shoulder and chest where grandchildren fit perfectly. The boy who had mocked me just 24 hours ago had vanished completely, replaced with someone quieter, deeper, more aware of the world's weight. "Grandpa, were you hungry too, when you gave me your dinner last night?" I hadn't expected that question. "No," I said truthfully. "I was full of something else." "What?" "Determination. Sometimes that fills you up better than food." He was quiet for a long moment, his small body warm against me. I could feel his breathing slow and deepen as exhaustion, emotional and physical, finally caught up with him. This wasn't victory I felt as I held him. It was relief, deep bone-settling relief that the lesson had taken root before it was too late. Outside, night pressed against the windows. Inside, respect had finally come home. But this was just the beginning. Tomorrow would show if the lesson truly stuck.
The next morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching the subdued mood in the house. James and Carol approached me before Tommy woke up, their faces carrying questions they'd held back all night. "Was it really necessary?" Carol whispered, gripping her coffee mug like an anchor. "He's traumatized. He cried himself to sleep." I looked at her steadily. "He's educated. There's a difference." James rubbed his face, looking older than his 35 years. "Dad, I get it. He was disrespectful, but couldn't you have just talked to him?" "I did talk to him," I replied, "but words wash away like rain. Experience carves itself into memory, like rivers carve canyons. Which do you think lasts longer?" They exchanged glances, and I saw something shift in their expressions, not quite approval, but understanding. "Look," I continued, "some lessons don't survive being gentle. Respect for elders, gratitude for provision, humility in the face of other struggles, these aren't learned from time-out corners or toy confiscation. They're learned when comfort disappears and reality appears." Just then, Tommy's footsteps sounded on the stairs, slower than usual, more careful. We all turned to watch him enter. What we saw would determine if yesterday's pain had produced today's wisdom. Tommy entered the kitchen with a composure I'd never seen in him before. No bouncing, no demands, no assumptions. He stood by his chair and looked at me directly. "Good morning, Grandpa," he said quietly. "May I have breakfast, please?" The please wasn't tagged on for show. It came from somewhere deeper. Carol's hand flew to her mouth. This was the same child who usually grabbed food without asking, who treated meals like rights instead of gifts. "You may," I said simply. "Sit down." Carol prepared his usual breakfast: scrambled eggs, 2 pieces of toast, orange juice. But Tommy's approach had transformed completely. He waited until the plate was set before him, said, "Thank you, Mom," and then did something that made us all freeze. He looked at me before taking his first bite, a silent request for permission. I nodded once. Only then did he begin eating, slowly and deliberately. No counting aloud, no games, no performance. Each bite was conscious, grateful. The silence around the table wasn't uncomfortable. It was full, like the moment after lightning before thunder, charged with change. James watched his son with something like wonder. This was still Tommy, but also not Tommy. It was Tommy evolved, Tommy educated, Tommy aware that every meal was a gift someone provided. Days passed, and the change in Tommy held firm like a nail driven deep into wood. His laughter returned gradually. He was still 8 after all, but it never again carried that sharp edge of mockery. He played with his friends, joked with his parents, but when his eyes turned to me, they held something new. Recognition. I wasn't just Grandpa anymore. I was the man who'd taught him hunger, which meant I was the man who'd taught him gratitude. One afternoon, I overheard him with his friend Jake in the backyard. Jake was laughing about his grandmother's hearing aid, making jokes about her asking what all the time. "Don't," Tommy said firmly. "That's not funny." "Why not?" Jake challenged. "It's hilarious when old people can't hear." "No," Tommy replied, and I could hear the steel in his young voice. "It's sad. And if you can't see the difference, maybe you need to skip a few meals too." Jake went quiet, confused by this new version of his friend. But Tommy didn't back down. The seed I'd planted had sprouted roots that reached deeper than one night's hunger. They reached into his character itself, changing not just his behavior but his being. A week after the lesson, I had my own test. Coming down the stairs for lunch, I stumbled on the 5th step, or was it the 6th? My mind went blank for a moment and I gripped the railing hard, frustrated with my own failing memory. I stood there, counting and recounting, when I heard Tommy's footsteps behind me. I braced myself from habit, waiting for a comment. Maybe not mockery, but something. Instead, small hands steadied my elbow. "It doesn't matter how many, Grandpa," Tommy said softly. "You made it down safe, that's what counts." My heart swelled, not from pride in my teaching, but from proof of his learning. He guided me down the remaining steps, patient as a nurse, counting them aloud not to mock, but to help. 3 more, Grandpa. 2, 1. There we go. At the bottom, he didn't let go immediately, making sure I was steady. "Want me to write the number on a card? You could keep it in your pocket. Then you'd always know." "That's thoughtful," I said, my voice thick with emotion I hadn't expected. This was the same boy who had laughed at my confusion just days ago. Now he was trying to solve it. The transformation was complete, and it was genuine. What surprised me most was Tommy's silence about that night. Children usually broadcast their punishments like badges of honor, turning suffering into stories for sympathy or attention. But Tommy kept our lesson locked inside like a private treasure. When Carol mentioned to her sister that Tommy had become remarkably respectful lately, Tommy didn't jump in with his tale of hunger. When James praised him for helping with chores without being asked, Tommy just nodded. The only sign that night lived in him was in his eyes when they met mine, a flash of understanding, a nod to shared knowledge. This silence told me more than any words could. He wasn't keeping quiet from shame or fear. He was keeping quiet because some experiences are too important to dilute with telling. He understood that the lesson wasn't a story to share, but a foundation to build on. He watched him pour his little sister's juice without being asked, help his mother carry groceries, offer his father the sports section first.
Each small act of consideration was a brick in the house of character he was building. And at the foundation of that house was a single night of hunger that had taught him to count what really mattered.
James pulled me aside one evening while Tommy was doing homework, another new development, doing it without being nagged. "Dad," he said, running his hand through his hair the way he did when something weighed on him, "I need to apologize." I waited, letting him find his words. "I laughed that night when Tommy mocked you. I laughed because it was easier than correcting him, easier than being the bad guy. I've been taking the easy path with him for years." He looked toward the dining room, where Tommy was bent over his math homework. "But you took the hard path. You did what I should have been doing all along." "It's not too late," I told him. "He's only 8. You have years to build on this foundation." James nodded slowly. "I see the difference in him. It's like he aged 2 years in one night. He notices things now. When Carol's tired, when his sister needs help, when you're struggling with something, he sees other people now, not just himself." "That's what hunger does," I said. "It shows you that you're not the center of the universe. You're just another person who needs things, same as everyone else." James squeezed my shoulder. "Thank you, Dad, for being the father I forgot how to be." One night before bed, 3 weeks after the lesson, Tommy knocked on my door. I was reading in bed, glasses perched on my nose, probably looking exactly like the old man he'd mocked. But his face held no humor, only purpose. "Grandpa, can I tell you something?" I patted the edge of my bed. He climbed up, settling cross-legged beside me. "I'm sorry," he said, and I started to tell him he'd already apologized, but he held up his hand. "No, I mean really sorry. Not just sorry I got in trouble, or sorry I went hungry. Sorry I hurt you." He picked at the bedspread, gathering courage. "When I said you couldn't count, I saw your face change. Just for a second. You looked smaller, like I'd made you smaller. And I felt big and smart and funny, but I wasn't any of those things. I was just mean." 8 years old, and he'd found words for cruelty most adults couldn't define. "I didn't know," he continued, "that making someone else feel small doesn't make you bigger. It makes you smaller too. It makes you—" He searched for the word. "Empty. Like being hungry, but in your heart instead of your stomach." I put my hand over his small one. "Now you know," I said simply. And he nodded, understanding passing between us like current through wire. Since he'd been so honest, I decided to share my own story. "When I was your age," I began, settling back against my pillows, "I mocked my father once. He'd forgotten the names of his cattle. We had 6 cows, and he called one by the wrong name. I laughed and told everyone at dinner that Papa was going senile." Tommy's eyes widened. "Your dad did the same thing to you?" "Worse," I said. "He made me tend those cattle alone for 2 days. No help, no meals brought to the field, just me and 6 cows I had to feed, water, milk, and muck out. By the end, I couldn't remember my own name. I was so tired and hungry." "Did you learn?" "I learned that forgetting names doesn't mean someone is stupid. It means they have 40 years of names stored in their head, and sometimes they get tangled. I learned that the man I mocked had been tending cattle since I was born, that his forgotten name meant nothing next to his lifetime of knowledge." Tommy was quiet, absorbing this. "So this lesson, it goes way back?" "Generations," I confirmed. "My grandfather probably taught my father the same way, and someday you'll teach it too." Tommy sat with that knowledge for a moment before speaking again. "When I have kids someday," he said slowly,
like he was making a sacred vow. And one of them laughs at me for forgetting something, I won't get mad. He looked up at me. I'll remember being hungry. I'll remember counting 17 hours. And I'll teach them like you taught me. His voice carried weight beyond his years. I won't hit them or yell at them. I'll help them understand that everyone forgets things. Everyone needs help sometimes, and nobody deserves to be mocked for being human. That's a good plan, I said. But remember, some children learn from words. Others need experience. You'll have to figure out which kind you're raising. How will I know? You'll know, I promised, the same way I knew with you. When someone's laughter carries cruelty, a parent can hear it. It sounds different from joy, sharper, meaner, smaller. That's when you'll know it's time for a lesson. Tommy nodded solemnly. I'll remember, Grandpa, even when I'm old like you. I'll remember. And looking into his serious young face, I believed him. The lesson had traveled from my grandfather, through my father, to me, and now to Tommy. The chain remained unbroken. That night, after Tommy went to bed, I sat alone in my chair, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea. They trembled slightly, they always did now in the evenings when fatigue set in, but this trembling didn't bother me anymore. It was just age, just time's signature on my body. Tomorrow, I might forget if I took my pills. Next week, I might count the stairs wrong. These things would happen because I was human, and humans are imperfect creatures trying to hold too many years in failing containers. But Tommy would never laugh at these failures again. He'd help. He'd support. He'd remember that every old person was once young, that every forgotten detail was replaced by decades of wisdom. My grandson had learned in one hungry night what some people never learn in a lifetime, that respect isn't earned by perfection, but by recognition of shared humanity. A boy's cruel laughter had transformed into a man's future wisdom. Someday, long after I'm gone, Tommy will sit at his own table with trembling hands. His grandchild might mock him for forgetting something, and in that moment, he'll remember being 8 years old, counting 17 hours of hunger, learning that respect weighs more than pride. He'll smile, that same smile I gave him, the smile of decision, and begin the lesson again. Because that's how respect survives across generations, not through gentle words that fade, but through lessons that carve themselves into memory, passed from one trembling hand to another, ensuring that wisdom outlives us all. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video, comment, and smash the subscribe button. Also, check out other videos on the channel. Joe's got more interesting stories for you.